Hi, my name is Tianyu Shea. I'm a third-year medical student at the New York Institute of Technology, and you're listening to Do or Do Not. Today we have Dr. Jason Golbin, System Chief Quality Officer and Senior Vice President of the Catholic Health Services of Long Island. Not only does Dr. Golbin oversee thousands of executive decisions, he is also board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary, sleep, critical care, as well as neuro-critical care. He obtained his degree from NYITCOM, completed his internal medicine residency at Lenox Hill, and went on to finish his fellowship at the prestigious Mayo Clinic. We hope that his interview will give you insight on what it's like in medical administration. Dr. Golbin, I just want to start off by saying thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I know things are really busy right now.
I just want to say it's an absolute pleasure. It's an honor for me to be able to speak with you and the audience. I always feel it's my job. It's an honor to give back to the medical school, to the osteopathic community who gave me a chance to be a doctor.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. Dr. Golbin, you're the Systems Chief Quality Officer at the Catholic Health Services. What exactly does this entail?
This is just for the listening audience. Is integrated care delivery health system with 6 acute care hospitals, 3 long-term care nursing homes, home care, hospice, a large outpatient practice, which is 500 doctors, which is part of a approximately 2,000 physician IPA and accountable care organization. So we really stretch the breadth of healthcare here on Long Island. I have responsibility for all things quality, regulatory, and I now wear the patient experience hat as well here in our healthcare system. I lead a couple of teams on each of those main triad of responsibilities here at the healthcare system. So my day may include an early morning meeting on updating something in our medical record and how would it impact our medical staff and how would it impact our nursing staff, to a drive out to one of the campuses to do what we call a tracer, which is where we trace some regulatory activity through the building, make sure, for example, our infection control standards are where they should be, not just the policy, but the actual practice, including examining medical floors, talking to staff, and really understanding. Then I would easily ping pong into a small work group discussing what we call appreciative coaching, which is our behavioral modification tool to have our staff practice. We built out, which we call the golden keys to eye care behavior. Eye care are the values of our organization. Then I could easily back to, let's say, corporate headquarters for our discussing the latest round of hospital-acquired infections that we're trying to prevent, to our safety challenge. We are on the high reliability journey. We're trying to become a high reliability organization. A highly reliable organization is an organization such as commercial airline travel or nuclear power plant, the deck of an aircraft carrier, where there is no margin for error, and the goal is zero harm. Well, there's no reason why healthcare in the year 2020 shouldn't be the same way. So we spend a great deal of time pushing towards zero. So we may spend a whole 2 hours discussing, 2 or 3 hospital-acquired infections, because why should a patient come to the hospital for procedure A or disease B and go home or develop infection C? They shouldn't. Our goal is zero harm to our patients. Sometimes that's followed up by dinner with a prospective candidate for a role within our healthcare system. So that's kind of a typical day. It's very, very wide-ranging. I put a lot of miles on my car driving between all of our organizations, but it's rewarding because from this seat, I'm able to influence, not just the patient in front of me, or let's say 25 patients on my calendar for the day in the office, but I'm able to influence a whole healthcare system's worth of patients.
How did you come across administration medicine? Did you think that you would be doing this early on in your medical career as a medical student?
So, of course, who even knew this existed? So I went to, then called NYITCOM, now called NYITCOM, graduated in 2000, and my initial thought was I was going to be a dermatologist. I can only remember my dad, since I'm little, whispering in my ear, dermatologist on Fifth Avenue, dermatologist on Fifth Avenue. So I figured I'd be a dermatologist on Fifth Avenue. So here's a great point, right? It wasn't even a possibility for a DO graduate to get an MD dermatology residency, right? Dermatology is very, very tough to get. So I knew that my only option was an osteopathic dermatology residency. One was in Philadelphia, one was in St. Barnabas in the Bronx. Actually, I spent a month in my fourth year of medical school commuting. I lived in my parents' basement, and I commuted to Philadelphia every day from Staten Island. It was about 2 hours each way to spend a month with an osteopathic dermatologist in Philadelphia, doing mostly hair transplant. Really incredible. I learned how to do hair transplant. Nonetheless, I knew that's what I wanted to. I had to do an osteopathic rotating internship. So I matched at St. Clair's Hospital, which is now closed. It was an incredible experience. 52nd and 9th in Hell's Kitchen in New York City in Manhattan. And there was no residents. So it was an incredible learning experience. There were 12 osteopathic interns and attendings, and that's it. Small hospital. For my flagship, month of dermatology at Barnabas, realized in that month that I just didn't want to be a dermatologist. It wasn't what I was passionate about. And I really wanted to take care of sick people. So I didn't proceed with my dermatology application. I applied rapidly for internal medicine slots. I knew I wanted to stay in Manhattan at a great program. And I'm very, very pleased to match at Lenox Hill Hospital. I spent 4 years there at Lenox Hill, 3 as a resident. I redid intern year because they wouldn't count that osteopathic year. I was a really good intern, having been through an intern year. So I stayed 3 years of medicine residency, and then I was elected as a chief resident. So that chief residency was my first flavor of administrative medicine. Myself and a co-resident were guiding 100, we had a big program, 100 residents, Lenox Hill, through their residency experience. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I loved the challenge of leading, of teaching, because there's 100 residents with 100 different issues. During my Pulmonary and Critical Care Fellowship, I was elected, appointed, it's a better term, the administrative chief fellow in my senior year. So I had some more administrative work there, some scheduling, some mentorship, some leadership, some teaching. I became the website administrator for somebody with small IT experience. It was, again, a challenge that I enjoyed. And then I came to private practice. I finished in 2008 to PGY 8. And moved to Long Island, became a practicing pulmonary critical care and sleep doc, part of a 10-physician group, one of the biggest groups here on Long Island, and we worked hard. I was able to start to get involved administratively after a few years in one of the 2 major hospitals I spent my time in their ICU. I became the associate director of the ICU after maybe approximately around 2011-ish. And I was able to help develop protocols and lead multidisciplinary rounds and really start to help guide along with my partner who was the director. And I was on the way to the airport and I got a call from a cardiologist friend of mine, a chief of cardiology, who said, have you ever thought about becoming a chief medical officer? I always say, it reminds me of a little of Forrest Gump. When he would get a postcard in the mail, have you ever thought of doing this? And I said, sure I had. And I actually had. I think they had faith that even though I had never been a chief medical officer, I have had some administrative and leadership experience. And they gave me the opportunity to become a chief medical officer. That was back in 2013 after about 6 years of practice. And it's been an incredible run. When I was a medical resident, I didn't love medicine clinic. I didn't love diabetes and hypertension, 2 challenging diseases, but I wasn't passionate about them. But when I got to pulmonary and critical care fellowship and spent time in the pulmonary clinic, in the pulmonary office, I just loved it. I loved it. One of the reasons I became a pulmonologist was, I think subconsciously, was that my own grandmother ended up dying from COPD, but she was tough and has always been an inspiration for me. And you have to love what you want to do. You want to be a gastroenterologist. You have to love abdominal pain. To be a pulmonologist, you have to love shortness of breath. Another one of the reasons that I picked pulmonary was that I have myself some exercise-induced asthma. And so, when you can understand and appreciate what it feels like not to be able to breathe, then you have empathy and you have compassion and you really can feel when your patients say, "Doc, help me, I can't breathe." I grew to love pulmonary in the office. So it was very hard that in 2013, when I shifted over administratively, I had to leave the practice. Rather than influencing, the one patient in front of you in the office, or the 25 on your calendar, or the 23 in the ICU, you're really influencing the practice of a whole healthcare delivery system.
Since we're talking about your love for pulmonology, you trained at the Mayo Clinic for that fellowship, like you said earlier. For the students and the pre-med students, Mayo Clinic is one of the most prestigious places in the world. Can you tell me about the institution in general and what you enjoyed there, what it was like?
When I applied for medicine residency, definitely some at least perceived challenges in my mind that as a NYITCOM or NYITCOM graduate, could I get into the most prestigious residencies? I did not take the USMLEs, and we almost did, another story, but I only took the CONLEX. A number of interviews for residency, and I was very, very pleased with Lenox Hill. My program director, still my friend at this time, her name is Robin Dibner. She was extremely supportive, and to her, DO or MD, it didn't matter. If you're a good doctor, you're a good doctor, and that's what I believe now wholeheartedly. But when I was graduating residency, actually, you apply in between your second and third year, you apply early for fellowship. Or for me, I was applying in my third year, knew I was going to stay for next year as a chief resident. Figured, I had worked hard, and I said, let me see what I can do. So I applied everywhere. I applied to Boston schools. I applied, Harvard, and applied to Yale, and applied to some incredible hospitals in California. And I saw and said, hey, Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, I don't know much about them, but interestingly, at Lenox Hill, we had gotten a pulmonary, they had an isolated pulmonary fellowship, not a pulmonary critical care fellowship, or else I certainly would have stayed. I loved it there. And who had done critical care at Mayo Clinic and said, Jay, there's this incredible place. Mayo. Again, as a New Yorker, you're just not exposed. You think the world stops and ends with Sinai and NYU and Columbia and Cornell, and there are some incredible institutions. But I said, let me apply to all the New York places and let me just see what's out there. I had never really been far outside of New York, but I said, all right, let me fly out to Mayo. They pay for the hotel for the night, so I flew out the day before. I landed in Minneapolis, and again had to look where Minnesota was on a map. And that is an absolutely true story. I had no idea where I was going. Rented a car, drove to the state in Rochester. They have a hotel right adjoining the Mayo Clinic, and then I said, all right, let me go. And right from the start, it was a dynamically incredible, intimidating place. I met the program director, who again is still a friend. His name is Ulrich Spex. He's a world famous Wegener's vasculitis, we call it ANCA-associated vasculitis now, researcher and clinician. And with each successive fellowship, interviews are rough. They're anywhere between 5 and 8 people, 5 and 8 physicians and staff members. And successive interview, I felt more and more of a connection with the way that these people practice medicine. It was really felt like medicine the way it should be, pure and, worrying about the patient. They actually have a saying there, the needs of the patient are the only needs to be considered. That is a classic saying by the Mayo brothers, and they live that and they breathe that. It's really incredible. So I remember after my 8 interviews, I came back to Dr. Spex, who closes out the day. He said, so Jason, what do you think? I said, oh my God, I would love the opportunity to be here, Dr. Spex. It was really, really incredible. And I called my mom as I'm walking through the subway, and my mom said, you're in the subway? I don't hear the trains. I said, no, it's called the subway, Mom. But here at Mayo, it's underground. Everything is connected underground because the weather gets so bad in Rochester, Minnesota, that you don't go outside in the winter. You just stay underground. But they call it the subway. And I remember calling her and saying, Ma, I may come to Minnesota. I really love this place. You focus on the patient. You're the doctor. You're not the phlebotomist, and you're not the nurse, and you're not the lab tech. Your job is to be the captain of the ship as the doc. It's a team effort. At Mayo, it was very interesting because I had spent residency wearing either scrubs or a shirt and tie, but with a white coat. There are no white coats there. Everybody's in business attire. Everybody. The only people who wear white coats are, let's say, if you're in scrubs, if you're in the ICU on overnight, or if you're a surgeon, in between cases. But other than that, you wear a suit every day. And they live by, the needs of the patient only needs to be considered. And if you don't live up to that, then Mayo is not for you. and they're not shy about that. Really, really special place.
That sounds like an amazing place. Do you have any advice for anyone that wants to train at the Mayo Clinic?
I was focused on learning clinical medicine, which is critical, but I didn't focus on research. And when you're at one of the top centers in the world, in the U.S., wherever it is, they're very focused on turning out academic leaders of healthcare. I always tell it's very important to people to get exposed to research because you learn how to conduct research, take part in research. You learn how to read other people's research, which is really, really important. Now, but if you're able to get a few papers, get onto some papers, work in a lab, it doesn't have to be bench research. It can be clinical research. I think that will help the academic centers see that you're interested in academic medicine because, again, they want to grow academic leaders.
When did you decide that you wanted to do medicine and you decided on the DO field?
I can only ever remember wanting to be a doctor. I don't remember anything else. Again, I think it's my dad whispered in my ear. I'm the only doc in the family. Everybody else, actually, I come from a family of teachers, and I still absolutely love to teach. But that's all I remember. In high school, I said, I don't know, I'm going to be a doctor. And then when I went to college, I went upstate to Binghamton. I was in the pre-med track because, again, that's all I knew. I was a science. I was boring in retrospect, a biology major, right? If you knew what you knew now, right? Maybe I should have studied, art history and, taken my pre-med science requirements. But I was a boring bio major. And unfortunately, I struggled the first year in college. I had a very, very low GPA. I found it challenging to buckle down and study the way I had in high school. Where I had studied, successfully. I don't know in retrospect, what happened. I was an 18-year-old kid and I had very poor grades. I improved those grades second year, sophomore year and junior year of college. I did, decent on the MCAT, and I had made a decision at that point not to take them again. Again, in retrospect, probably not the right decision because I had been scoring higher on the practice MCATs. But I said, let me apply. Now, you have to remember my psyche at the time was that I had done well in high school and gone into almost every college I applied to, almost every, with some exceptions, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. But other than that, I got into most of the Ivies, and the Ivies that I had applied to. I thought I was going to go to Cornell, but ended up at Binghamton with two of my best friends. So I applied to something like 20 or 30 medical schools, MD schools, and I didn't get into any. I think I got one interview, and it was a horrible, horrible feeling, a blow to my inner self because, again, getting into college had been relatively simple. As senior year went by and I wasn't getting interviews, and I said, oh my God, what does this mean? I had watched a friend of mine had also applied to MD schools, wasn't getting in, and then learned about osteopathic medicine. It was something we weren't exposed to, but to me, they were just doctors. I didn't know the difference. And he had applied, not too late to osteopathic school and actually got in during our senior year for the next year to NYITCOM. And I said, what's that? And so I started to read and learn all about osteopathic schools and osteopathic medicine, but I still wasn't convinced. And I said, I'm going to try again. So after I graduated college, or as I saw I wasn't getting into med school, I needed a plan for the next year, and I applied to and thankfully got into Georgetown University's they have a special master's program in physiology and biophysics where a very, very, very intense year. You take a number of the first year medical school classes with the Georgetown University medical students, and this way you really see how you would do in that environment, and then you do graduate with a master's degree in physiology and biophysics at the end of a long year. Tough year. Actually made some great friends. One of them who, again, I'm going to give you interesting coincidences, is actually my cardiologist now, who applied while we were at Georgetown to NYITCOM and got in. And I stubbornly resisted applying to osteopathic school until very, very late in that year at Georgetown, and applied. I got an interview, had a great interview. Again, that's after 20 or 30 MD applications. And the NYITCOM said, we like you, but, we're full already. Too late kind of thing. Think about applying earlier next year. So now here I am now. It's, my second year out of college. What am I going to do? Like I said, I come from a family of educators, so I was able to get a job as a New York City school teacher. I became a junior high school teacher on Staten Island, which was another incredibly incredible learning experience year for me, because here I was. I had 4 biology classes, as I had my master's now, but I had an earth science regions class, but I had never taken earth science before. So I was reading the textbook the week before the kids, and really challenging year, but great year. I mean, incredible experience to see what it's like. It's very rare that you get the opportunity to understand what your parents do for a living, and I got to see what my parents did. Both my parents are teachers. Now, wow. So thankfully in that year, I finally applied to osteopathic schools right up front. Day one, I think I dropped it off at the school, or, I manhandled to the post office in Long Island and applied also to MD schools again. Got a few more interviews, as I now had a master's as well as, science masters. But so after 3 years and approximately 30 years of school, 30 schools applied to each year, the only school that ever gave me the opportunity was NYITCOM. And I have to say, every single day, I am forever thankful to them. So that's how I got into NYITCOM. I got in very early. I was actually one of the first, 10 people accepted. I got a free microscope because I sent my check in like the next day. And that was like $1,000, I think, those microscopes. But here's the kicker. That 3 years of trying to get where I wanted to go and not being able to get there, that failure has made me, a million times stronger today. When I finally got to school and day one, and we took this class and that class, I worked harder than I could have ever imagined. I started at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and I sat in the dungeon. We called it the dungeon. I don't know what you guys call it now, but like beneath the library. And I studied till midnight. But it made me extremely driven, because I knew that I was meant to be a doc and to help people, but I had to work hard to get there.
That's an amazing story about failure and overcoming that failure. So excuse me if this is a question that's a little too personal, but did you take any loans while you were in medical school?
Yes, so not personal, not a secret. My parents are teachers, retired New York City school teachers. So yes, I took a lot of loans, and every single month I make that payment, and it's on automatic withdrawal, so I don't have to think about it, and it will be for many, many, many more years. But, it allowed me to do what I'm doing now. Look, I could have chosen a more lucrative specialty maybe, but I made a conscious decision to really follow my passion and do what I thought that I was going to medical school to do. So in the way I look at the loans, as they are the vehicle that allow me to follow my dreams and follow my passion and become a doctor. Without them, none of this would be possible.
I know that you have an MBA degree that you obtained in the last couple of years. Do you think that might have helped you with, the loan repayment or the financial aspect of these loans? And, what do you think about the degree in general? I know a lot of physicians like to get this degree. Do you think it has any advantages? Would you advise doctors to get this degree?
So it depends on what you want to do with your life. So if you have lots of free time and you're interested in learning, I love lifelong learning. But I asked my boss to support me going to get my MBA when I became chief medical officer, because I thought it was important to have the business related skills in leadership and in being able to read a financial spreadsheet, and teamwork in HR and supply chain. I mean, these were not what they teach you in medical school, right? So no, did it help me with my loans? No, I still make my payment, but it's helped me, tremendously pursued my administrative career and continue to pursue it. The number of skills learned in that class, I didn't even know how to use Excel well before, because it's not something you use every day as a pulmonologist. I knew how to read a CAT scan. That's what was important, right? I knew how to somebody who's an ARDS, I knew how to, keep them alive on a ventilator, get them better, but not reading a financial spreadsheet. But so those skills are what's needed in this job. I actually again, I'm a fan of lifelong learning. So when I came over to the administrative world, I said, how am I going to educate myself in clinical medicine? I did 8 years of clinical training. How am I going to educate myself? Well, I went out and found that there are a number of certifications in the administrative medicine. And I started with in quality utilization, earned further certifications in patient safety, from another one in quality, in patient experience, in joint commission, regulatory management. So I think it's very, very important that, just because it's not clinical doesn't mean it's not important. If anything, those have helped me more to my daily job and challenges. However, I certainly keep up all my boards, my schedule. I have neuro-critical care. And then I'm such a fan of, again, I can't stress enough, I'm so thankful to NYIT every day. And now I have the opportunity to serve as adjunct faculty and teach on the pulmonary class. So when I get the opportunity to speak with the dean, I still tell him this. Yeah, I'm keeping up with my clinical studies. My reading is split between reading the Joint Commission Journal of Quality and Patient Safety versus reading the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine. Keeps me busy.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Golbin. My last question, you've given us a lot of great advice already, but do you have any advice for a student or a resident or even fellow considering going into administration?
I think there's nothing wrong with taking a leadership role. I would encourage taking a leadership role in wherever you are now. So if you're a clinical obstetrician, aim to be the quality leader in obstetrics, aim to be the chair or the vice chair or the program director in obstetrics, and see if you like it. Not everybody likes administrative medicine. I'm in a lot of meetings. There's some great books about how to run meetings more efficiently. I've read them all. You can influence the journey to high reliability, to safety, the journey to zero harm in whatever you do. This impacts our office docs as well. My MBA class, which I did, it's co-sponsored by my healthcare organization, my system, and Adelphi University, was a physician cohort. So there was, I can't remember, it was about 12 or 13 of us, and it ran the gamut. There was myself and another CMO. There was a chief hospitalist. There was a couple of practicing surgeons in private practice. There was a gyn-onc surgeon. There was an anesthesiologist. There was an internal medicine doctor who was in utilization. So it really ran the gamut. So it made for these incredibly engaging conversations. As we study topics, how does that impact the private practitioner? How does that impact the health system? How does that impact the employed doc? I would say, whatever you're doing now doesn't stop you from becoming a leader and seeing whether you enjoy sitting on the administrative side of the table. The other benefit of being a physician on wearing the administrative hat is that you approach things as a doc. So you see things as a doc, and in many ways you can understand, you can empathize. You know what it feels like to have that conversation with the patient. As part of our patient experience training, we teach empathy here at CHS. And I always explain to the classes, and the classes are, we mix the classes. So it's everybody from the nurse assistant to the nurse, to the housekeeper, to the environmental services worker, to the electrician, in with the doctors and nurses. And I always explain to them that as a pulmonologist, I thought I had this tremendous empathy. And as I would unfortunately give sometimes diagnosis of, bad diagnosis of lung cancer or some bad pulmonary fibrosis. But what I really had was sympathy and not empathy. And I learned myself going through this journey that learning is lifelong. So there's no reason why you can't continue to learn in whatever aspect of medicine you do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Golbin, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us.
Thank you for taking the time. I'm happy to talk in the future as needed.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there is someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea, OMS 3. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do